Welcome to the Hunchcast, where we discuss all things the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm Leslie.
And I'm Patrick. And today we're discussing books 6 and 7 of Victor Hugo's Notre-Dame de Paris.
Insert 6-7 joke here. This is going to be so dated in 5 months. Apologies, listener.
And Leslie, last episode I promised we were going to get back to the plot.
And oh boy, are we?
We are!
Yay!
There's no more digressions about architecture or the nature of the printed book, but we need to pause for a moment for our minute of history.
Yes, you are the Hunchback historian, so indulge me. I'm here to learn.
All right. People from the past are not that different from you and me. And Victor Hugo was a master procrastinator.
Obviously, I mean, we talked about this in the previous episode. It took him about 2 years to start writing the novel that he was contractually obligated to write. He had to lock his clothes away and wrap a shawl around himself and write stark naked to reduce the temptation to leave his home. If there was a king of procrastinating, I would crown him that title, if he ever got around to showing up at the ceremony.
So Hugo is contractually obligated to write this novel. He is writing at a frantic pace. He writes a 500-page novel in about 4 months.
George R.R. Martin, take some notes, brother.
But he still found time to goof off.
Oh, obviously. There's always time for that.
Oh, of course. And there is especially time to doodle.
Oh my gosh, did Victor Hugo doodle?
He did. So if you look at the original manuscript of Notre-Dame de Paris, it's full of these little cartoons and bizarre drawings. Some of the drawings are more technical. You know, there's a crude map of Paris. There are bits of architecture and drawings of certain characters like the Sack Lady and Quasimodo. But other drawings are just silly faces and little cartoons that he probably just did when he was bored and wanted to screw around with his quill and ink bottle. And I love that detail. It makes Victor Hugo seem more than just the author of a classic novel, right? This famous person. He's like you and me. He's bored out of his mind and drawing little cartoons to pass the time.
And wouldn't it be so benevolent of me if I linked to scans of these crude doodles in the show notes so our friends, fans, family, and folks at home could view them on their own time?
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely?
Ah, a girl can only dream. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing that with me. Can we please get to the plot now?
Yes, we can.
Amazing. Okay, let's jump right into book 6. It is the morning of January 7th, so the morning after the Feast of Fools. Just the previous evening, listener, if you might recall, Quasimodo was arrested by Captain Phoebus and his men for attempting to abduct Esmeralda off the street. And Book 6, Chapter 1 begins during Quasimodo's trial. So for all the flaws of the medieval justice system, I commend it for its speed. You know, we're recording this in 2026 America. I cannot imagine a justice system where if you attempt to abduct a woman off the street one evening, you are tried, sentenced, and punished the next morning.
The system may be speedy, but it's not free from red tape and bureaucracy. Because the auditor, the guy who is in charge of listening to criminals plead their case, is deaf.
Well, Victor Hugo says this is fine. He says this is a small defect in an auditor. It is quite enough for a judge to appear to listen. But I would disagree with Victor Hugo here because, listener, imagine you're on trial for a crime you did not commit, and the person who is responsible for hearing your testimony and interpreting all the information can't even hear properly. You're screwed. You're cooked. You're done for.
Well, the auditor can nod and go through the motions and just assume that you're guilty. That works most of the time. It's not going to work so well when the deaf auditor is listening to a deaf criminal.
Yeah, remember, listener, the bells deafened Quasimodo when he was in his early teens, so he can't hear anything. And this is my favorite scene so far. We have the deaf auditor interrogating Quasimodo, the deaf bell ringer, Neither man knows the other is deaf.
They are purely guessing.
Yeah, they have no idea what the other is saying, but they're pretending to because the auditor doesn't want to let on that he's deaf. The result is a confused, mismatched jumble of words. So, Patrick, let's try to have a conversation and pretend that we can't hear each other. Ready?
Okay.
How are you today?
My name is Patrick.
Wow, that was such an astute comment about the weather. I agree. It's raining pretty hard.
My favorite color is blue, to be honest with you.
Wow, coming to your Christmas party next week? I would love to. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I do hate your mother. And the auditor is very offended. The people who are watching the trial, including Jean.
Yeah, it's interesting. During the Middle Ages, trials were public events. And again, as I've said several times throughout this podcast, these people were really bored. They had nothing to do. So yeah, you want to go see the Hunchback get sentenced for a crime that we don't know if he actually committed? Okay. And Jean is there because I guess he's drawn like a magnet to anywhere he can cause the most trouble.
It seems so. And while the auditor is offended by Quasimodo, he sees that people are laughing, and he assumes Quasimodo makes fun of him. And then he gets very, very haughty and defends his status within Paris's bureaucracy. He says, and I will put on a character voice.
Oh, of course, I would expect nothing less of you.
So, this is as much to say, perverse and thieving...
More theatrical. You could do even more. I know, you have it in you, baby, you know.
So, this is as much to say, perverse and thieving knave that you are, that you permit yourself to be lacking in respect towards the auditor of the Châtelet, towards the magistrate committed to the popular police of Paris, charged with searching out crimes, delinquencies, and evil conduct, with controlling all trades, interdicting monopoly, and maintaining the pavements, with disbarring the hucksters of chickens, poultry, and waterfowl, of superintending the measuring of sticks and other sorts of wood.
The result of all this is that when the provost walks in, who is essentially, Pat, am I understanding this right? The guy who's in charge of sentencing criminals?
Yeah, he's also like the mayor of Paris.
Okay, cool. The result of this mismatched jumble of words is that the provost believes Quasimodo is making fun of him. The provost has not heard the crime that Quasimodo is being charged with. He doesn't care. He commands the archers to take Quasimodo to the pillory at the Place de Grève and let him be flogged, which means whipped, and turned, which means given up to public ridicule for an hour. So, if you really look at the text with a microscope, you can deduce that Quasimodo is not being punished for attempting to abduct a young woman because the guy who sentenced him doesn't know what he did. He is essentially being punished for being deaf. That is the point that Victor Hugo was trying to make here. And yeah, like I said, it's great that this justice system is fast, but not very fair to the disabled.
Not at all. And you know what? Life's not fair. Sometimes you get sentenced for a crime you only half committed. Sometimes terrible tragedies befall you for no reason, like losing your baby.
That was a great transition, Patrick. 10 out of 10, no notes. Yeah, chapter 2 brings us to the sack woman of the Tour Roland. Remember her? She is the woman who, in book 2, called Esmeralda a locust of Egypt. And we didn't really learn about her, but by God, we're gonna learn about her today.
These 3 middle-class women are on their way to give charity to Sister Gudule, the sack lady. And while they're coming to see her, they start gossiping about her backstory.
Yeah, her name wasn't always the sack woman. I would question her parents' judgment if that is the name on her birth certificate. No, her name is actually Paquette Le Chantefleurie. Apologies for my broken French, listener. She used to live in Reims?
Rhymes?
Sure. She had a pretty tragic life. She started selling her body at age 14, so younger than 16-year-old Esmeralda. She had a daughter when she was 20. She named her daughter Agnes. And Paquette loved Agnes more than any mother had ever loved a daughter before. She lived and breathed for this child. And one day when Agnes was about 1 year old, roughly, Paquette arrives home and finds that Agnes is gone. Her cradle is empty. She's hysterical, running around the neighborhood asking if anyone has seen her baby. Then she hears a baby's cry coming from her house, and she runs back home, hoping Agnes has miraculously returned to her cradle. But the child she finds in her daughter's place is a, quote, sort of little monster, a hideous, one-eyed, limping thing squalling and creeping about the floor. Patrick, who does that description remind you of? You got 3 guesses.
I don't need 3. That sounds exactly like Quasimodo, who is a changeling child, a very common trope in fairy tales and, frankly, with stories about the Romani.
And just like another classic fairy tale, Cinderella, the only thing left of baby Agnes that Paquette had left was a single pink satin baby shoe. So just like in Cinderella, the prince identifies his dream woman who he danced with at the ball by the single shoe she leaves behind. Maybe Paquette will use this shoe to be reunited with Agnes. But in the meantime, she grabbed this little deformed toddler Quasimodo, went to Notre Dame, threw him into the little wooden bed underneath the image of St. Christopher. And if you want to hear what happened to Quasimodo after that, listener, go listen to episode 2. And Paquette believes that Agnes and toddler Quasimodo, because he's described as being about 4 years old, were switched by a Romani couple that broke into her home. We don't know this for a fact. She is just basing this explanation off of some rumors circulated by a neighbor. But over the years, this belief has turned into general discrimination against and hatred for the Romani people, especially Esmeralda, which is why when Paquette, aka the Sack Woman, saw Esmeralda dancing in the Place de Grève in Book 2, she yelled, "Get out of here, locust of Egypt."
And while the middle-class ladies are divulging this backstory and talking about the Romani, I want to point out, as they're bickering and discussing this little history, the backstory they give for the Romani of how they entered into Paris is not original. It's not a matter of Hugo pulling something out of thin air, like the wedding jug, right? He takes the description of where the Romani came from and what their customs are like, almost word for word from a book called Le Dictionnaire Infernal, or the Hellish Dictionary, which was a book full of all sorts of supernatural and alchemical definitions and stories. There are sections about alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, and there's an entire section on the Romani, who are referred to as Bohemians. So again, Hugo did his research, but not from any Romani people themselves.
Well, that was my next question. How much of this so-called dictionary was based off of legitimate sources, and then how much of it was based off of rumor fueled by discrimination and judgment?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Putting Romani people as a category in the same book where you have, chapters on necromancy and magic spells, that kind of says where the bias is. There are some accurate historical facts, but Hugo didn't go to an anthropological study. He went to a book about witchcraft and demons.
It is pretty disappointing to learn that Victor Hugo did very little research on Romani culture and customs, and the sources he did use were a dictionary about the occult, which itself was not very well researched, and his own memory of what the Romani he grew up around in Spain were like, and I don't think he interacted with those Romani people very much or at all. It disappoints me a little bit.
It's not so much the things he doesn't include, it's the specific choices he does include.
Especially because Esmeralda's cultural identity is integral to her story. You know, this is a story about a Romani woman for a reason. It's very reflective of general sentiment during the time period. Again, one of the questions I posed in episode 1 was, is this a book that could only take place in 1482? So far, I think yes, especially in terms of the medieval justice system. And speaking of that justice system, Chapter 3 is all about Quasimodo's public humiliation, which he was sentenced to by a man who didn't even know what crime he was being charged with.
It is a full-on spectacle. Just as the people celebrated Quasimodo as the Pope of Fools yesterday, today they are gathered all around the pillory of the Place de Grève and hooting and hollering and excited to see him whipped and tortured. Jehan gets on the shoulders of his buddy Robin Poussin and shouts, "Oh, come and look, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to peremptorily whip Master Quasimodo, the bell ringer of my brother. He's a knave of Oriental architecture, with a back like a dome and legs like twisted columns." It's entertainment.
Yeah, this public torture and humiliation is just as entertaining to the Parisians as yesterday's Feast of Fools was. I can't emphasize enough, these are the same exact people who crowned Quasimodo their Pope of Fools and threw a parade in his honor the previous night. In episode 1, I briefly talked about the way Victor Hugo writes the crowd, or the mob as I've been referring to it. And I used the term it, the singular, very intentionally, and I'll tell you why, listener. There is an episode of the show Rick and Morty where Rick visits a planet that is inhabited by hundreds of thousands of people, but they all share one conscious that jumps from brain to brain. So, hundreds of thousands of bodies, one mind. And that is the way I see the crowd in this novel. There are thousands of bodies standing there. They're all doing the same thing. There are no independent thinkers. There are no naysayers. No one is raising their hand and saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. Like, don't you remember when we praised this guy last night? No, they don't care about that anymore. They switched up like that.
"'Tis an age without pity," Hugo writes. Unlike some of the other writers of the Romantic era, Hugo cannot be accused of trying to make the Middle Ages seem like a utopia compared to this modern, post-Enlightenment society.
Yeah, he was contracted by his publisher to write a historical novel in the style of Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott glorified the Middle Ages. He saw it as this rosy time of knights and keeps and castles and princesses. Oh boy, isn't this so beautiful? But here we have Victor Hugo putting the shortcomings of the Middle Ages on shameless, humiliating display.
But is that brutality so different than the brutality of Hugo's then modern age? He writes, "It is a tradition of jail and wardens which has not been lost, and which the handcuffs still preciously preserve among us, a gentle, civilized, humane people." So yesterday's pillory are today's handcuffs.
Or today's guillotine. France's final execution by guillotine didn't take place until the year Star Wars was released in theaters. Fun fact, listener.
So it didn't happen until after the Star Wars were over? Who won those? Star Wars?
Who won the Star Wars? What a question. Not Quasimodo, because the whip that he is being publicly beaten with, this thing is, first of all, he's being beaten by a man named Pierre the Torturer.
Pirate Torterou.
That means Pierre the Torturer, right?
Something like that. He was born for this job.
This thing is nightmare fuel. Hugo describes it as a whip composed of long, white, glistening thongs, knotted, twisted, and tipped with sharp bits of metal. Listener, if you are squirming in your spot right now, I don't blame you, because so am I.
The cat of nine tails, they called it.
Ugh.
Meow.
And it's interesting to note that throughout his entire, is it an hour of being whipped?
Yes, he's sentenced to an hour of being whipped.
Quasimodo is totally still throughout all of this. He doesn't cry out at all. He tries to break free, but not for long. I want to break free. He just sits there and takes it. And it's not that the whip isn't painful. Hugo writes that it's tearing Quasimodo's back open and blood is showering over the crowd. Again, listener, are you cringing? So am I. So Quasimodo's pain tolerance prompts me to wonder, has he been whipped before or beaten? I mean, how is he so accustomed to this level of pain? Last episode, we talked about how when he goes out and walks the streets, boys come up to him and stick pins in his hump. That's painful, but I don't think it's this painful. So just something to chew on, listener. Once the whipping is over, Quasimodo's back is wiped down with... This is a very, very small detail by comparison, but it really got my mental gears turning. His back is wiped down with some ointment, quote, which in an incredibly short time closed all wounds. What frickin' miracle ointment did they have in 1482 that could close open, bleeding wounds in seconds? I mean, in the previous episode, we talked about how the king's physician was such a quack that he thought a roast mouse could heal a gunshot wound. But here we have ye old Neosporin that can close wounds almost instantly.
It's probably some aquifer. Maybe Pierre Toteroux was the inventor of aquifer.
I hope his descendants are rolling in it, because if he was, good for him. He deserves his due.
Quasimodo is lying there taking it. He is pretending to be dead.
But the punishment isn't over. Remember, the provost sentenced Quasimodo to stay on the pillory for an extra hour. And during this hour, he is totally at the mob's mercy. They're throwing rocks at him. They're jeering at him, calling him names. Mask of the Antichrist, broomstick rider, a witch. They're calling him a witch. A monster, a face to end a pregnancy better than all medicines or other concoctions. Mind you, no one in this crowd knows that Quasimodo tried to abduct Esmeralda last night. Phoebus isn't there. Gringoire isn't there. Again, not even the person who sentenced him knows what he did, so the crowd definitely isn't going to know what he did. So they're not jeering at him and throwing rocks at him because, oh, you tried to abduct an innocent young woman, screw you. They're jeering at him because of the superstitions associated with his disabilities. And I can't emphasize enough, they just heralded him as their sovereign last night.
Quasimodo is suffering immensely. Hugo writes, "With such a degree of deformity, is infamy a thing that can be felt? But wrath, hatred, despair slowly lowered over that hideous visage, a cloud which grew ever more and more somber, ever more and more charged with electricity, which burst forth from 1,000 lightning flashes from the Cyclops' eye. And yet that dark cloud of despair parts for a moment, as Claude Frollo enters the square, almost like a savior come to rescue Quasimodo from all this humiliation and torture."
Yeah, Claude Frollo, his adoptive father, the man who gave him a home, taught him to speak, taught him to read, gave him a job. I mean, Victor Hugo spent an entire chapter talking about how much Quasimodo loves and reveres Claude Frollo. Surely Claude Frollo will intervene and help Quasimodo off the pillory, right? No! Claude Frollo looks away, turns around, and has the mule that he is riding carry him off. And Quasimodo is crushed. And now that Claude Frollo's gone, Quasimodo's only hope of any sort of comfort in the situation is crying out for a drink of water. And Jean's friend Robin yells, "There is water for you, deaf idiot!" and throws a sponge soaked in the gutter at Quasimodo's face. Patrick, I caught the biblical reference here right away. Did you?
No. What did you take?
Well, in the New Testament of the Christian Bible, when Jesus is being crucified and publicly humiliated, just like Quasimodo is, he cried out that he was thirsty, and to mock him, somebody held a sponge soaked in vinegar to his lips. And here we have a very, very strong parallel. We have Quasimodo being publicly humiliated, just like Jesus was, crying out that he is thirsty, just like Jesus did, and someone throwing a sponge soaked in something that is probably not entirely water at his face, just like what happened to Jesus Christ. I'm going to go a step further. I think in that case, Claude Frollo would be Saint Peter.
How so?
Well, during Christ's public humiliation, his closest friend, Peter, denied that he knew him, just like Frollo denies that he knows Quasimodo, or maybe not overtly, but casts down his eyes and doesn't acknowledge that he knows him. And what's ironic here is that the only person who Quasimodo loves, remember, Victor Hugo spent an entire chapter of book 4 talking about that man does not help Quasimodo. The person who does is Esmeralda, the girl Quasimodo tried to abduct the previous evening. Esmeralda has absolutely no reason to help Quasimodo here. I mean, she has every reason to join the crowd and throw stones at him, because I would venture to say she is the only person who is present here who actually knows what he did the previous night that led to him landing on the pillory. But in an act of, again, Christ-like selflessness and mercy, she removes this hollowed-out gourd from her belt and holds it to Quasimodo's lips and gives him a drink.
This moment is Quasimodo's moral pivot. From this point, he is shifting his affection and his loyalty away from Claude Frollo towards Esmeralda, who is kind to him not out of any sense of obligation or scientific curiosity, but simply because it's the right thing to do. Being on the pillory, even to give somebody a drink of water, is an infamous act. All eyes are on you. It's shameful. Esmeralda doesn't care. She's going to do what she thinks is right, even if it means helping somebody who tried to kidnap her, who hurt her.
Well, Esmeralda did something very similar the previous evening, didn't she? Pierre Gringoire was about to be hanged, and she offered herself in marriage to him to save his life, even though just a few minutes prior, he had failed to help her when she was being abducted off the street. So Esmeralda had nothing to gain from that marriage, but she still saved his life because it's just the right thing to do. So here I am arguing that Quasimodo is a Christ-like figure. I think Esmeralda might be as well. And how ironic that Claude Frollo, a priest, the Archdeacon of Notre Dame, is the one who is not helping anybody in this situation.
Despite the pillory's infamy, the crowd goes wild. They start cheering. They shout hooray. They shout Noel. They are applauding this act, even though 10 seconds earlier they were shouting for Quasimodo to be killed. The crowd is fickle.
Extremely so, yeah. They are a hive mind. They are a collective conscious. And that collective conscious has no morals, really has no opinions. The crowd sides with whatever force has the upper hand in the moment. A couple minutes ago, they hated Quasimodo. Now that Esmeralda's giving him water, they love Quasimodo, and they want him to drink to his heart's content.
Maybe this is an argument for romantic individualism. Esmeralda doesn't care what society thinks. She's going to do what's right.
So book 7 begins with a 2-month time jump, which, as a first-time reader, really threw me. I mean, all the adaptations of this story I've seen take place over the span of only a few days. The Disney movie takes place over 48 hours. So, it's the middle of March now? Okay, I guess we're doing this. But then I was comforted by some beautiful personification of the cathedral included in the first paragraph. Hugo writes of Notre Dame, "The great central rose window glares like the eye of a cyclops." Which is really interesting because just a few pages ago, Quasimodo was also described as a cyclops. So here Victor Hugo is furthering a theme he introduced in book 4, which is that Quasimodo is the cathedral. He is Notre Dame in human form. And I want to present an argument about that. We have talked at length about how this novel's original French title is Notre-Dame de Paris. English translation, Notre Dame of Paris. And it wasn't until the second English translation was published in 1833 that Quasimodo was made the titular character, and this book began to be called The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But if Quasimodo is the cathedral, if he is Notre Dame of Paris in human form, hasn't Quasimodo always been the titular character of this novel? Couldn't you make that argument?
That's edgy. I dig it. And in book 4, Hugo says of Quasimodo's relationship of Notre Dame that Egypt would have taken him as the god of that temple. The Middle Ages believed him to be its demon, and he was in fact its soul. He is the soul of Notre Dame. He is Notre Dame. That's edgy, and that's going to make the Frollo people very annoyed.
Well, we'll see. But Book 7, Chapter 1 does not take place inside the cathedral. It takes place across the square.
And across the square, you have a lovely assortment of luxury apartments. One of them owned by Madame Aloïse de Gondelaurier. And I gotta say, I don't know what the rent is going for on a place right in front of Notre Dame Cathedral with a balcony, fully made out of stone, luxury apartments, but it can't be cheap.
I'll look on Zillow and get back to you.
Because this place is really nice. It's able to accommodate not only Madame Aloïse de Gondelaurier, but her daughter, Fleur-de-Lis, and all of her companions who are hanging out and just having a gay old time as aristocratic young lady. Also present is someone we're familiar with, Leslie.
Yeah, Captain Phoebus, the captain of the king's archers who rescued Esmeralda from Quasimodo on the night of the Feast of Fools. What's he doing here?
Well, why wouldn't he be here? Don't you want to spend time with your fiancé?
Plot twist! Phoebus, the man of Esmeralda's dreams, is spoken for.
Phoebus is engaged to Fleur-de-Lis, but he's not super happy about it. Phoebus is really out of place in this aristocratic household. He is the only guy around, right? He needs to be in the streets, being a rogue and getting into parties, right? He needs to be with wenches, not with maidens. And as Hugo writes, Phoebus is rather vulgar in his tastes, right? So he doesn't need to care about fancy tapestries like the ladies are making or whatever the affairs of courtly love are going to be. He needs a beer and a set of cards to gamble with.
He's the kind of guy that you would find with a bush light in hand watching the game at a sports bar. He's not the kind of guy that you would find at an upscale black tie party, which is essentially what's going on here.
Exactly. As Hugo writes, he was fond of the tavern and everything that goes with it. He felt comfortable only among coarse language, military flirtations, easy beauties, and easy conquests.
Fleur-de-Lis looks down from her beautiful balcony in her expensive apartment that probably goes for millions on Zillow today. And she sees Esmeralda dancing in the square and says, "Hey, Phoebus, isn't that the girl you said you rescued about 2 months ago from the hands of a dozen robbers?" Which made me giggle because as readers, we know that's not true. Phoebus rescued Esmeralda from 2 men trying to abduct her off the street, one of whom got away. But Phoebus probably feels embarrassed that he let one of the men get away, so he came home and inflated the story. Yeah, babe, I went out and I rescued a poor little girl from a dozen robbers, maybe even 24. Oh my gosh, look at my muscles. Look at how cool I am.
Hey, never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Absolutely. But Fleur tells Phoebus to bring Esmeralda into the house for their amusement. And here we see the furthering of a theme Hugo introduced from Esmeralda's first appearance. She is not viewed as a human being. She is viewed as an object. She is called La Esmeralda, the Esmeralda. So Fleur sees this Romani girl dancing and says, oh, I'm bored. Let's bring her up and maybe she'll entertain us, like a wind-up toy. Esmeralda comes into the home immediately. She is the most beautiful girl in the room. And all the young women in their fabulous clothes and their pointy hats and their makeup, they are not happy about this. They immediately hate Esmeralda. And this is a tale as old as time. Why does Regina George hate Katie Heron? Why do the Ugly Stepsisters hate Cinderella? Because her beauty threatens them, especially in the presence of Phoebus.
And Phoebus isn't really paying attention to this conflict and cattiness at the moment. He is, as the kids say, rizzing up Esmeralda. The two are talking about the night they met, and Phoebus is bragging about how Quasimodo was punished so severely, but he can't remember Quasimodo's name.
Yeah, he just remembers that he is named after a Catholic holiday and nothing else.
So, it's on the tip of his tongue. He knows it's a Catholic holiday. Oh, what is it? Is it Quatre Tombes? Is it Blooming Easter? Is it Mardi Gras?
Is it Yes, the Mardi Gras of Notre Dame.
This is not just an example of Phoebus being bad with names, which is going to come up a lot.
Yeah, he is terrible with names.
Especially the names of important people in his life. But this is actually an inside joke that only Hugo probably would have gotten. As we talked about in previous episodes, Hugo had a ton of research in notebooks and random scraps of paper.
Yeah, he wrote down everything.
And he did not have a name for Quasimodo at first. In his outline, he calls him the deaf mute. And there's a great piece of paper where Hugo writes, possible names for the bell ringer. He's got a list of 9 names, and sure enough, some of these are on there. So Phoebus is remembering all of the rejected names for Quasimodo.
So you're telling me that there is an alternate universe where Victor Hugo named Quasimodo Mardi Gras?
Yes, there is.
And this book was called, at least in English, The Fat Tuesday of Notre Dame?
Yes, or possibly Goof. Some of those names were pretty goofy. Some of them were named after Catholic holidays, other ones named after weird esoteric demons. Quasimodo seems very pedestrian by comparison.
Oh, boy. Well, all of the aristocratic young women in the room, especially Fleur-de-Lis, they don't like that Phoebus and Esmeralda appear so taken with each other. And because they can't attack Esmeralda's looks, they start to tear her down by attacking her outfit.
In the words of the noble James Franco in the classic 2014 film The Interview, they hate us 'cause they ain't us.
Oh my gosh, they are so threatened by Esmeralda's beauty and they need to take her down. So they pile on her very passive-aggressively. Oh, that's an alarmingly short skirt. Oh, maybe your arms wouldn't be so sunburnt if you covered them like a real woman. And Esmeralda is very, very upset. But her humiliation has just begun, because Fleur-de-Lis spots a small leather bag hanging around Djali's neck. Esmeralda says that that leather bag contains her secret. So one of the girls takes the bag off Djali's neck and opens it. Inside are a bunch of little alphabet blocks. Djali arranges them. Remember, Esmeralda has this goat very well trained. They would do phenomenally in a Barnum and Bailey show. Djali arranges these blocks to spell the name Phoebus. So Esmeralda's secret is that she is in love with Phoebus. I think this is the medieval equivalent of going through a girl's notes app and finding unsent letters to her crush, or finding her crush's last name and her first name put together. So Esmeralda is beyond humiliated now.
You say that Esmeralda trained Jolly to spell. There's no way Esmeralda knows how to read and write.
Well, I'm basing that off of something that Pierre Gringois tells Claude Frollo later in the book. Spoiler alert, he tells Claude Frollo that Esmeralda taught the goat how to arrange these blocks into the name Phoebus, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Esmeralda herself knew how to spell the name Phoebus. She might have asked somebody else. She might have asked Pierre Gringois.
That makes it even sadder because Jolly is a more popular writer than Gringois. Her audience stays around.
Yes, Jolly is a more popular writer than Pierre Gringois, but Jolly has just as many critics as Pierre Gringois, because as soon as Fleur sees the name Phoebus, she bursts into tears. She knows that her fiancé has a secret admirer and that she has a rival. And Fleur-de-Lis's mom throws Esmeralda out of the house.
Chapter 2 follows Claude Frollo, who this whole time has been staring at Esmeralda and all of the events going on in the apartment from one of the towers of Notre Dame.
Patrick, you're a man. What do you think of that decision?
I would get binoculars because Frollo must have excellent vision to be able to see hundreds of yards away. This guy is obsessed with Esmeralda.
Which you would never know based on the way he treats her, because so far, the one and only time we've seen them interact, which was in book 2, was when Claude Frollo was watching Esmeralda dance during the Feast of Fools and scowled at her and called her a witch, and Esmeralda in response shuddered and said, "Oh, it is that hateful man." So based on that one and only interaction that we've seen, it sounds like the two of them hate each other. But the fact that he is obsessed with her and she is consumed his every waking moment comes as a surprise to me based on the way he's treated her so far.
I mean, not just every waking moment. Even when he's trying to sleep, he will frequently pass entire nights alone in his cell thinking about her.
Well, maybe that's why he's 35 and looks 70, because he hasn't been sleeping. Make sure you get your 8 hours a night, folks. It is important.
Yeah, Dom Claude should have been trying to find the secret formula for melatonin rather than trying to turn light into gold. And he is so obsessed. He's almost like a statue looking at her. It's really creepy. And Hugo writes, quote, "You would have said that Claude Frollo had nothing alive about him. Not even his eyes." Leslie, this struck me as particularly notable because in book 1, Frollo's eyes are the only part of him that are expressive and youthful, right? He'll have this ugly scowl on his face, yet his eyes will flash with life and some kind of beauty about them. Now, they're as cold as the rest of him.
And this is a really profound contrast with Esmeralda, who is described as being light and agile and joyous. Claude Frollo sees another man participating in Esmeralda's act. He doesn't like this at all because he wants to be the only man in Esmeralda's life, even though he treats her like crap and yells and scowls at her every time they make eye contact. So he tears himself away from this scene and he descends the stairs. He wants to confront this man one-on-one, but as he's going downstairs, he passes the belfry and he peeks inside and he sees Quasimodo, who is also looking down in the square, engrossed in something. And Claude Frollo wonders if it can be Esmeralda that Quasimodo is watching so earnestly. And I have to point something out here. This might be a very small detail by comparison, but it really struck me. I am a copy editor. That's my career. That's how I pay the bills. Every copy editor worth their salt knows grammatically a person is a who, a thing is a that. So I wouldn't say Patrick, the man that is my co-host. I would say Patrick, the man who is my co-host. So one could easily write this off as a translation error or a grammatical error on Hugo's part. I don't think so. I think it's an expression of the way Claude Frollo sees Esmeralda. Because, like everybody else, he does not see Esmeralda as a person. He sees her as an object. He sees her as something to possess. So he's not going to refer to her as a who, he's going to refer to her as a that. Can it be Esmeralda that he is watching so earnestly? I found that very, very striking, and one of those blink and you'll miss it details that Hugo so masterfully weaves into the narrative.
You know, I didn't even consider that on my first, third, or eighth billionth reading of this. And hearing you talk about that, the difference between that and who, I had to check the original French. And sure enough, Hugo says the French word for that. He says que. So I think you're onto something. So Frollo goes out into the square. Esmeralda is gone. She is off dealing with Phoebus and Fleur-de-Lis and her secret with her goat. So he's able to confront the other person who was with her, the man. And lo and behold, it's Pierre Gringoire.
Yes, his former student who he brought up as a boy and taught how to read and write. Remember Pierre Gringoire? Well, he's still here. He is still a part of this story, whether he wants to be or not.
Last time we saw Gringoire, he was trying to legitimize himself in the eyes of the state, and now he is dressed like a Harlequin clown, and he has a new job. Frankly, I think this new career suits Gringoire. Rather than writing plays or poems or making artillery cannons that destroy bridges and kill 24 people, he is a juggler. And I gotta say, this new act is pretty sweet. I would go pay to see this. He is balancing a chair between his teeth, and he will balance a cat on top of that chair. Who wouldn't want to see that?
Hey, I would throw a couple bucks his way. Absolutely, that sounds great. So Pierre Gringoire fills Claude Frollo in on everything that's happened to him the past couple months, and Frollo is enraged when he finds out that Pierre and Esmeralda are married. Again, he wants to possess Esmeralda. He wants to be the only man in her life. But Gringoire swears that theirs is a marriage in name only.
Frollo is very skeptical of this. He keeps inquiring. He asks, "Have you touched her?" "Whom?" replies Gringoire. "The goat?"
And speaking of the goat, Gringoire tells Claude Frollo what we saw in the previous chapter, that Esmeralda has taught Jacques to spell the name Phoebus using little blocks. Gringoire has not put two and two together. He hasn't realized that, oh, this must be the name of the man my wife is in love with, because as we established in episode 1, Gringoire is not the brightest bulb in the box. But Claude Frollo puts that together, and he begins to curse the name Phoebus, whoever that man may be.
The next chapter brings us back to Quasimodo, who we're not going to see for a while after this. Quasimodo has lost interest in ringing the bells.
What? That's his favorite thing. That's the only reason he has to live.
Well, he's got something else to worry about now.
What is that?
Esmeralda. So he's upgraded from 2,000-pound brass girls to a girl of flesh and blood. He's watching her from afar. But unlike Frollo, who is filled with hatred and contempt when watching Esmeralda, Quasimodo has an almost childlike glee. He's probably experiencing the feeling of having a crush for the first time. And there's a huge shift in his heart, in his focus. Hugo writes, "Was it possible that Big Marie had a rival in the heart of the bell ringer of Notre Dame, and that she and her 14 sisters were neglected for a more beautiful and a more lovely object?"
Object. There. Right there. That's that word again. Object. Esmeralda is not viewed as a person in this story. She is viewed as an object. And this is not Victor Hugo making the claim that women are objects. This is not him muscling his personal views into the narrative. This is him reflecting in his writing the general consensus on Esmeralda.
I can agree with that, but I do want to distinguish Quasimodo's feelings for Esmeralda versus Claude Frollo or Phoebus or Pierre Gringoire's feelings. He had no interest in her for her beauty. He didn't care. He tried to kidnap her. He only cares about Esmeralda because she gave him water.
Yeah, one can only assume that Quasimodo has fallen in love with Esmeralda because she was the only person who took pity on him in Book 6 when he was being publicly humiliated. And you're right, Patrick, I do really appreciate that distinction. Quasimodo loves Esmeralda because of her kindness and her character. Claude Frollo and Phoebus and Pierre Gringoire, they only love Esmeralda because she's hot and shows her ankles. And speaking of Claude Frollo, we're going to get a little more of an insight into his family dynamics in Chapter 4. This chapter is told from the perspective of our favorite troublemaker, Jacques Frollo. He wakes up one day, realizes he has no cash on him, and he goes to ask, who else? His older brother.
Yeah, Jean is looking to make a withdrawal from the first bank of Claude Frollo.
He gets to Notre-Dame. He asks a passerby where his brother might be, and he is told, oh, he is in his hideout in the tower. And Jean says, a fine opportunity for seeing that famous den of sorcery. This line really struck me because, A, even Jean believes the rumors about how Claude Frollo spends his free time, and 2, this just reinforces how distant these two are. Jean hasn't even seen the little corner of the world where Claude spends most of his evenings, and he is relying on local rumor to gauge what his brother is up to. So even though Claude raised Jean and is the closest thing Jean has to a father, they have grown very distant as adults. Jean gets to this chamber, opens the door. Claude Frollo is hunched over a book, engrossed in thought, mumbling and ranting maniacally to himself. He's talking about this legend of a rabbi who had a magic nail and a hammer, and every time he used the pair of tools to carve someone's name into a wall, that person would die, like ye old Death Note. And Claude Frollo is trying to fill the role of Light Yagami and figure out how the rabbi did it. First, he considers carving the name Phoebus into the wall. Gee whiz, I wonder why. But he settles on carving the Greek word for fate into the wall. The implication, of course, being that he wants fate itself to perish.
And if you recall our discussion of the preface from episode 1, this is meant to be the origin of that word that Hugo saw carved into the wall of Notre Dame, the word for fate. It was created by Claude Frollo's hand. And yet, for such an important aspect of the story, the inspiration, this scene is played for laughs. While Claude is making this big dramatic speech and carves the word for fate on the wall and lamenting that he's losing control of his own life and destiny, Jean is in the corner looking at him like, why did you write the word in Greek? It would have been way easier to write the Latin word for fate.
The question I came away with here, and Pat, maybe you could help me with this. Why does Claude Frollo carve this word into the wall? If he is struggling with his feelings for Esmeralda and wants them to go away and wants to be free of her, why doesn't he carve the word beauty or romance or lust into the wall? Why does he want fate itself to perish?
Well, he wants to externalize all of his problems. It's not that he is attracted to Esmeralda or he is feeling temptations of the flesh. Oh no, it's an external force, a pagan force, fate, that is forcing him to feel these feelings. Frollo doesn't want to be responsible for anything. He has a platinum victim card and is playing the blame game. In this case, with destiny.
So you're saying that he does not want to consider the possibility that the only person responsible for his feelings is himself and that he has to deal with the consequences of them. He wants to use fate as a scapegoat.
100%.
Well, that does make sense given Claude Frollo's faith, because according to the Catholic catechisms, a sin is a wrong committed consciously and purposefully. So, for example, if you're driving and you skid on some ice and your car veers into the other lane and you hit another car and kill the driver, that's not a sin. because you didn't kill that driver purposefully. You killed them on accident. Therefore, you're absolved and you don't have to be punished for that. So Claude Frollo here wants to absolve himself of any sin. He wants to be able to go to heaven with a clear conscience and not have to suffer in purgatory because, oh, it's not my fault that I have lustful feelings toward this young Romani girl. It's fate. Fate has inflicted these feelings on me. So I'm not a sinner. I get to go to heaven scot-free.
But this also contradicts a lot of important Christian ideas. This is a concept that goes all the way back to the days of St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, right? The idea of free will, that all of our actions are our fault. Frollo doesn't want to believe that because, again, he wants to use destiny as a scapegoat. He doesn't want to be responsible for the bad in his life, only the good. Claude Frollo doesn't want to feel responsible for all of the terrible things he's been thinking and doing recently. He wants to feel like, in the words of the great American philosopher Katy Perry, like a plastic bag drifting through the wind, wanting to start again.
And that's a great contrast with his younger brother, Jehan, who does not see himself as a plastic bag. He is taking charge of his destiny by asking his older brother for money. And in response, Claude says, "Hey, Jehan, I'm happy to see you, but I'm really disappointed in you, kid. I mean, I've heard all these rumors about the way you've been behaving. You've been beating up this person, having an affair with that person, etc." Which, again, is really interesting and just serves to emphasize how distant these two brothers have become in their adulthood. Just like Jehan has to rely on local rumor to gauge how Claude is doing, so too is Claude relying on local rumor to gauge how Jehan is doing. And Claude tells Jehan, "You have to think seriously of mending your ways." And Jehan looks around Claude Frollo's chamber with all of its cobwebbed artifacts and tools and says, "Everything here is of the devil, just like dice and bottles." So Jehan is calling his older brother out on his hypocrisy. And frankly, Jehan is probably the only person in Claude Frollo's life who can get away with doing this. He goes, "I might sin by getting drunk and gambling, but here you are sinning by trying to transmutate materials. You and I are not so different. Who are you to tell me that I need to mend my ways?"
Frollo's not having any of that. He wants to stay in lecture mode and feel superior, right? Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. And Claude warns his brother, "Jehan, the end will be bad." As in, if you continue down this path of drinking constantly and hooking up with random women, you're not going to have a very good ending. And Jehan counters, "The beginning, at least, will have been good." And I love this exchange because A, it perfectly demonstrates how different these brothers have become as adults, and B, it perfectly encapsulates everything Jehan is about. He is here for a good time, not a long time. YOLO swag for Jesus forever.
And there's a knock at the door.
Uh-oh.
So Claude shoves Jehan into the corner and gives him a snack.
I don't think he gives him a snack. I interpreted this as Jehan finds some crumbs of cheese on the floor and just starts eating them like a gremlin.
And while Jehan is having his little snack, this guest of honor enters. It is the king's attorney in the ecclesiastical court, Jacques Charmolue.
What does that mean, Patrick?
He's in charge of torturing people and interrogating people.
Gotcha.
And he also happens to be the guy Esmeralda's goat did an impression of in book 1.
Oh, so he already has a grudge against this goat.
Yeah, and Charmolue asks Claude Frollo, "Yeah, so when are we gonna apprehend and hang that sorceress you were telling me about?" And Frollo is telling Jacques, give it a minute, right? We gotta wait till all the cards are in place.
Ooh, so here we have Claude Frollo as the puppet master, pulling the strings of the justice system, trying to get Esmeralda locked away.
And just like King Louis XI, Charmolue is buddy-buddy with Claude Frollo because he's also interested in sorcery and especially in alchemy.
Oh my gosh, is Claude Frollo holding sorcery lectures in his little chamber? Is he taking money on the side by teaching people how to turn lead into gold?
No, I think he's in it for the love of the game. I also think Charmalou is the only person who genuinely admires Frollo and thinks he's a smart, cool guy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think Claude Frollo has earned himself a very positive reputation.
No, and while they're talking about, doing hermetics and black magic and turning metal into gold, isn't this whole thing kind of ironic? Because Charmalou is in charge of capturing witches and torturing them, and yet he and Claude are talking about a witchcraft of their own. Now, alchemy was not just ye old chemistry or ye old authentic science.
Or ye old Breaking Bad.
Actually, I think it was ye old Breaking Bad, because it was against the law, because a lot of it was considered this weird esoteric cult stuff that was outside the realm of mainstream religion or science. So these two men are doing the very thing they're condemning innocent people for.
Very much a do as I say, not as I do justice system. As they're talking, Frollo becomes absorbed by a little slice of life unfolding in a corner of his chamber. A fly has become entangled in a spider's web. He really needs to get a maid in here. Seriously, he needs to grab a Swiffer. He needs to clean all the dust off of all of his little tchotchkes or whatever. He needs to clean this place. Maybe that's why he's 35 and looks 70. Because as he's inhaling dust and bugs all day long.
Yeah, this man cave has never felt a woman's touch.
Neither has Claude Frollo. So he's watching this spider and this fly, and the spider begins devouring the fly, as the spider does. Claude Frollo thinks of himself as the spider and Esmeralda as the, quote, predestined fly. Again, there's that idea of fate. But he also thinks of himself as the fly and fate as the spider. And again, like you just said, Pat, here is Claude Frollo using fate as a scapegoat when he himself is the one orchestrating Esmeralda's inevitable arrest. He doesn't want to consider, even for a second, that he might be the bad guy in this situation. Oh, I didn't want to have Esmeralda arrested. It was fate that compelled me to go behind her back and manipulate the justice system and blah, blah, blah. My hands were tied. That's like if I pulled up to my ex's house and keyed his car and took a Louisville Slugger to both headlights, slashed a hole in all four tires, and then burned his house down with him in it, and was brought into a court of law in front of a judge and 12 of my peers, and put on the stand, and when I was asked, "Why did you do this?" I say, "Oh, it wasn't my fault that I destroyed his car and burned down his house and killed him. It was fate that compelled me to do that. I had no control over my own actions. It was fate that made me do that." I don't think the jury would take that as an explanation. I think I'm doing life regardless.
Your Honor, I am a Scorpio.
Your Honor, in my defense, you weren't there. Your Honor, that's cat, bro.
Claude has to realize how faulty his logic is. He is both the spider and the fly. He switches back and forth. This is supposed to be a novel about fate and destiny. The narrator seems to believe in it. Claude believes in it. I don't know if this is actually a novel about fate.
No, this is not at all a novel about fate. This is a novel about men who don't want to take responsibility for their actions, using fate as a way to absolve themselves of their crimes. That's what this novel is about, but what do I know? I've never read it before, and I'm only halfway through. So after that diatribe from Claude Frollo, everybody leaves Notre Dame and goes out into the streets, where Jehan belongs.
Right? And in the next chapter, while Claude is trying to turn light into gold, Jehan is trying to turn money into beer. So he takes the money that Claude gave him and obviously does not use it for tuition or a new book or new shoes. He goes to the tavern and runs into his buddy, Captain Phoebus.
Does Jehan know everybody? He is the most well-connected person in Paris. I mean, he recognized Clopin in book 1. How does he know all of these people from all different walks of life?
Because he's not in school. He's just walking around the streets.
And this is pre-internet, so this is when people actually used to go outside. As the two young men catch up, Claude Frollo is in earshot of them, and he recognizes the name Phoebus on his brother's lips. And he puts 2 and 2 together and realizes, oh my goodness, this must be the man who Esmeralda is in love with. So he decides to stalk this sun god for the rest of the night. Jehan and Phoebus duck into a tavern called Eve's Apple. Victor Hugo is not very subtle about his allegories, and Claude waits outside for them all night, pacing in front of the tavern, covered head to toe in a dark cloak. And after a couple of hours, Phoebus and Jehan stumble out of this tavern. And Phoebus says that he has to go meet Esmeralda at an inn. I can only imagine for what, and I cannot emphasize enough, Phoebus has a fiancé. Who cares, though? Not him. And he goes on his merry way, leaving Jehan passed out drunk in a snowbank. And Claude Frollo follows Phoebus.
I gotta say, what is this rendezvous that Phoebus has planned? He didn't bring money for an actual date.
Yeah, he keeps asking Jehan, hey, do you have money on you? I need to pay for this room. And Jehan is so drunk that he cannot give a coherent answer.
Was he expecting Esmeralda to pay for this first date?
I mean, I hope not. He knows that she does not have a traditional home.
What a scumbag. Anyway, eventually Phoebus notices that he's being followed, and he suspects that it might be this night-prowling cryptid called Le Moine Bourreau, which is translated in a lot of different ways. Moine is monk, and Bourreau is like sullen or grim.
Yeah, my translation calls this guy the Goblin Monk, this cryptid that Phoebus has heard rumors about, who likes to prowl the streets of Paris at night.
And that's my favorite way to interpret it. I like the idea that Frollo is perceived as this weird goblin walking through the streets, because frankly, with that bald head and big nose and scary cloak, he is. Again, Hugo is putting this medieval superstition on full display. It's this sociological concept of an enchanted world where the supernatural doesn't exist, but everybody believes in the supernatural. So the world is magical and full of goblin monks and all sorts of creatures simply by virtue of the fact that people believe in it, and that's how they perceive ordinary phenomena, through a magical lens.
So Phoebus turns around and faces Claude Frollo, who again is covered head to toe in this dark black cloak, who he suspects is this goblin monk he's heard about. And he says, hey man, I'm broke. If you rob me, you won't get much out of it. Which reminds me of that old joke, yo mama so poor that pickpocketing her is just practice. But Frollo grabs Phoebus's arm and addresses him by name, which startles Phoebus. He says he knows Phoebus is going to an inn to meet a woman. And Phoebus shares that that woman's name is, get this, La Esmeralda. Again, remember, we established that Phoebus is terrible with names. So while, as we discussed in episode 1, Esmeralda is researching the etymology of Phoebus's name, Phoebus can't even be bothered to remember hers. This is a very, very one-sided dynamic.
Ladies, if he wanted to, he would.
Absolutely.
So Phoebus, being broke, asks this strange phantom statue goblin monk looking guy for some money to rent a room. Because again, he has not brought any money for this date. And Claude agrees to give Phoebus the money on one condition. He wants to be in the room while Phoebus and Esmeralda are making out and doing God knows what during this rendezvous. And so Claude Frollo is the reason why hotel rooms come with that random third chair in the corner. I think any reasonable man would balk at such a proposition. Why would you stare at me while I'm alone with a girl? That's creepy and weird. I don't care how much you pay me. But Phoebus, He doesn't mind. He's like, all right, just go in the closet. I'll take the money, and you know what? You can see me in my prime, right? Ew. And he's not even considering for a second that Esmeralda didn't agree to have some creepy old man staring at her in the closet.
Not old, 35.
You were really on that, man.
How could I not be?
Phoebus doesn't care about getting Esmeralda's name right. He sure as heck isn't going to care about her consent.
So Claude Frollo follows Phoebus to what I would only describe as a ye old Motel 6. It is run by a woman Victor Hugo describes as an old hag and a ragged urchin. She has no teeth, cat-like whiskers. Every inch of her skin is wrinkled, and she is dressed entirely in rags. What a diva. The inn itself does not have a single redeeming quality. The ceiling of the lobby isn't finished, so you can see into the upstairs room. All the furniture is falling apart. There are ash heaps and cobwebs everywhere. This place has a solid 1 out of 5 stars on Yelp. Maybe 2 out of 5 if there's a free continental breakfast, but I highly doubt it. So this old hag leads Phoebus to a room. Phoebus shuts Frollo in a closet and then leaves to get Esmeralda. After about 15 minutes, Phoebus returns with Esmeralda, and Jacques is also with Esmeralda for some reason. I don't know what Jacques' role in this rendezvous is going to be, but cool, the goat is there also.
Do you really think Esmeralda would have trusted Gringoire to babysit?
That is a really good point. I retract my statement. You're absolutely right.
And as their date begins, Phoebus immediately is terrible to Esmeralda. He's not being very nice to her at all. He's offended that she isn't throwing herself at his feet and worshiping him. And he's annoyed that he has to put on the charm and actually be attractive to her. He says, you know, I should hate you. He's trying to guilt her out of her clothes.
Yeah, in the most blatant terms, that is what Phoebus is trying to do. And Esmeralda is not stupid. She may be a naive teenage girl, but she's not an idiot. She knows what Phoebus wants from her. She knows that Phoebus wants to be physically intimate with her, but she doesn't want that from him at this point. Remember, as she told Gringoire in Book 2, she believes that if she loses her virginity, the charm on her necklace will wear off and she won't find her parents, which is what she wants more than anything in the world. She wants a big, happy, traditional family. So props to Esmeralda for standing by her principles and her autonomy and resisting Phoebus's guilt and advances.
Yeah, Phoebus doesn't care about any of that stuff. He keeps touching her and groping her. And she keeps, trying to escape. She doesn't want to be super physical right now. She wants an emotional connection. And he is not taking no for an answer. Esmeralda asks Phoebus if he loves her. And he says, I love you and have never loved any but you. He's pulling out all of the pet names. He's calling her the angel of his life. He's being the ultimate male manipulator right now.
I love you and have never loved any but you. That is the fattest lie I have ever heard in my life. Second only to, I'll be back with the milk in an hour.
Now, all of this seems pretty cynical as far as a portrayal of love and relationships.
Yeah, I thought Victor Hugo was contracted to write a historical novel about the Middle Ages in the style of Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott glorified the Middle Ages. He found them very chivalrous and romantic. Victor Hugo is not portraying medieval romance very positively. I mean, we're only halfway through the novel, and 2 people are already cheating on their significant others. Of course, Phoebus is cheating on his fiancée, and Esmeralda may only be married in name only, But she does have a husband who she knows she is being unfaithful to by coming into this inn with Phoebus. So this is not a very rosy depiction of medieval romance.
You know, maybe Hugo was writing from experience. What if I were to tell you that around the time he was writing these chapters, he was dealing with an affair of his own?
Well, I know Victor Hugo, despite the fact that he was married for the vast majority of his life, kept up affairs with many, 3 hours later, many women. He was the Don Juan of Paris. So is that the affair you are referring to?
Oh, not at all.
Oh, okay, do tell.
At this time, Hugo was, still clinging to his Catholic faith and very traditional. He loved his wife Adele very dearly and was faithful to her. But the same couldn't be said about Adele. While Hugo was writing these big dramatic plays and making a name for himself and procrastinating the writing of Notre-Dame de Paris,
and trying to provide for his many children, yes, trying to be a good dad,
Adele was having an affair.
With who?
Victor Hugo's best friend.
No!
So Hugo is best friends with this guy, Sainte-Beuve, who is a literary critic and not much of a writer of his own, but he's a hanger-on of the young romantics. He's the Peter Pettigrew to the Marauders.
He's the hype man of the romantics. He's the Flavor Flav,
if you will. And Sainte-Beuve is going up to Adele and saying, "Oh, Victor doesn't pay enough attention to you. He doesn't appreciate you. I, Sainte-Beuve, really understand you, Adele." So they're screwing. They're hanging out with each other. They're visiting each other in secret. And sometimes they're even showing up to meet each other in costumes so they're not recognized. And by the time Hugo discovers this, he's heartbroken. He's not angry. He just wants everyone to be happy. So he tries to reconcile his friendship with Sainte-Beuve to understanding that he is having an affair with Adele. And while they're trying to piece all this together, Hugo is met with the ultimatum from his publisher. You got to write this book or else. And the original outline for this novel did not include the character Phoebus or anything about an infidelity subplot.
Interesting.
And my theory, and while it hasn't been proven, I think I can make a compelling case. Finding out that your wife was cheating on you with your best friend probably played a factor into how love and relationships are portrayed in this novel. This story did not have a subplot about infidelity until after we know that Hugo discovered the affair between his best friend and his wife.
So you think that art imitates life. And as I mentioned in episode 2, every work of fiction, no matter how far removed from reality it is semi-autobiographical. So yes, it makes sense, especially since you have looked at the timeline, and it makes sense chronologically that Victor Hugo would have dealt with the knowledge that his wife was cheating on him with his best friend by incorporating a new subplot into the novel he was working on at the time, in which 2 characters cheat on their significant others with each other. Yes, that makes a ton of sense.
Now, I'm not going to come out and make a press release like Adrian Glew did with his Quasimodo discovery, but I will say, I think I have a stronger claim than he did.
Yeah, listener, if you haven't listened to episode 2 yet, please go back and do so, because this is not the first historical theory that Mr. Hunchback historian Patrick has floated on this podcast.
This whole exchange is very sad. All Phoebus wants is to get into Esmeralda's pants, or petticoat in this case, and she just wants true love. She's a very traditional girl at the heart of it. Everyone thinks she's a floozy and a strumpet and a witch. She literally asks Phoebus, "Oh, teach me your religion so we can get married." She wants to become a Christian so she can get a proper marriage and a nice wedding and live happily ever after. Probably the way that she had been told to, a fairy tale life. She wants a house. She wants a family. She probably wants 1,000,000 kids. And, of course, this is repulsive to Phoebus, who just wants a one-night stand. I feel bad for Esmeralda. She wants to be one of those ladies on TikTok with all the chickens. She doesn't want to be a strumpet.
She wants to be a trad wife. That's the reason why she agreed to follow Phoebus to this inn, even though she knows what he wants to do with her here. She wanted to ask him to teach her his religion so they could be married in a church and move into a home. She wants to find her parents. She wants a husband. She wants one big, happy, traditional family. Of course, Phoebus wants no part of this. He already has a fiance. He already has a traditional life that he is a part of, and he is repulsed by it. So what makes us think as readers that he is going to want that with Esmeralda? And Phoebus tells Esmeralda, wait, why do we have to get married? We can be in love without getting married. We don't need to parade our affection before the world by getting married and living a traditional life. We can be in love without getting married.
Yeah, I just don't like labels, babe.
Yeah, baby, I don't want to be exclusive. I'm not ready for a relationship. Listener, if you are seeing somebody and they say, I'm not ready for a relationship, but can we continue to see each other? That means that person wants to keep seeing you, but he also wants to see Jessica and Daphne and Christine down the hall. That's what that means. Don't fall for it. Esmeralda resists this, of course. She holds on to her principles and her dreams, and as one last Hail Mary attempt to get this girl where he wants her, Phoebus starts playing the victim. Oh, Esmeralda, you don't really love me. If you loved me, you would perform this act for me. If you really loved me, you would give yourself to me physically and do whatever I say. You don't really love me. And Esmeralda is so heartbroken by this insinuation that she abandons her dream right then and there. She says, oh, who cares about my parents? Who cares about marriage? Phoebus, I will give myself to you fully in whatever form you want me for the rest of my life. And she finally falls into Phoebus's arms and lets him kiss her. Patrick, permit me this little digression.
Very Hugolian of you, Leslie.
I strive to make that man proud every day of my life. As I've said multiple times, I have never read this novel cover to cover before, but I am a fan of this story, and I have interacted with many, many people who have read this novel. And I know what Hunchback fans and classic literature fans in general tend to think of Victor Hugo's Esmeralda, the version of this character from this novel. I have heard that she is stupid. I have heard that she is some damsel in distress. I have heard that she is an idiot. Blah, blah, blah. And this particular action, her abandoning her dream of finding her parents and getting married rather than standing up to Phoebus, her changing for a man, essentially, is very, very highly criticized by Hunchback fans. However, if you think Esmeralda is an idiot for abandoning her principles the second Phoebus starts to manipulate her emotionally, you don't know what it's like to be a teenage girl. You don't. Teenage girls are extremely vulnerable to this sort of woe is me, you're the bad guy, you don't love me, you're treating me like crap tactic. And I would say the majority of teen girls have heard something along the lines of, if you really loved me, you would perform this act for me at some point in their lives. I'll give you an example. In the 1980s, this professor at Emory University, Dr. Marian Howard, she surveyed over 1,000 sexually active teenage girls, and she asked them, what is the one piece of information you most want to know about sex? The overwhelming majority replied, how to say no without hurting the other person's feelings. Generally, girls are taught, either by their parents or by their community or by their culture, to prioritize boys' feelings over their own comfort and boundaries and virtue. Esmeralda, in this scene, by saying, oh, who cares about parents? Who cares about marriage? You say I don't love you, I'll prove to you how much I love you. She's just doing what countless teenage girls did before her, and what countless teenage girls did and continue to do after her, which is put her own comfort and boundaries aside the second a boy starts to pout and complain. And listen, this is not me jumping on a soapbox and saying, men suck, I hate men. That's not at all what I'm doing here. This is just me putting Esmeralda's actions into context, because I know how readers generally think of her. I know how readers characterize her choices. But I think characterizing her as stupid, especially because of this scene, it's unfair, and it completely disregards the psychology of being a 16-year-old girl.
And ultimately, Esmeralda succumbing to this man's pressure is going to lead to tragedy. Frollo is watching them intently, jealously, going absolutely insane from his little vantage point in the closet. As Esmeralda finally gives in to Phoebus, he bursts out in rage and stabs Phoebus in the back with a dagger. Esmeralda is so horrified that she passes out.
Yeah, I would too if I saw someone get stabbed.
And while she's passed out, Frollo takes advantage of her. He grabs her and kisses her, and Hugo writes that his lips are worse than the red-hot irons of an executioner.
He needs to lay off the spicy food.
And when she comes to, Frollo is gone. He's jumped out the window and nowhere to be seen. Phoebus is bleeding and being dragged away by soldiers, and Esmeralda is being blamed for the crime. She hears someone saying, a witch has stabbed the captain.
They think she did it! Dun dun dun! Yeah, now that I've read book 7, I think there's a good reason why most 2-act stage adaptations of this novel end Act 1 with Phoebus's stabbing, because this is the point where the stakes go from 0 to 100. Now, Frollo's antics have a body count, and I can only imagine the stakes are going to escalate from here. Patrick, this brings us to the end of books 6 and 7. What are your overall thoughts on the installment we discussed today?
Boy, we really got a lot going on here.
I know!
This section is a real roller coaster of emotions, pardon the cliche, right? We have the political satire going on with the deaf auditor, immediately followed by Quasimodo's bloody and brutal torture and humiliation. You've got lamentations on lust and fatality, and then jokes about grammar and the medieval education system. It's a lot of contrast, right? A lot of black and white, but Hugo balances it well. There are great dramatic scenes, the torture of Quasimodo and Esmeralda's deliverance, giving him water. That is an absolute highlight. That might be the most beautiful section of the novel.
And one of the most iconic scenes of the story. There's a reason why it features in just about every adaptation of this novel.
And thankfully, this section doesn't have any major low points. I'm not super thrilled with some of the sections with Jacques Charmelot and Frollo yelling about the spider and the fly. It's a little bit obvious, but it works. Frollo is really the star of this section, and we see how far he has fallen since book 4, where at least he had some kind of nobility about him as a intellectual and a misunderstood genius. And now he's Le Moine Bourreau, like the creepy goblin man watching people screw from the corner of a hotel room. He is a complete degenerate and will not admit to any responsibility. Oh, it's destiny that drove that knife through Phoebus. It's destiny that made me stare at a girl. without her consent. It's destiny that made me kiss her without her consent. It's destiny, I suppose, that forced me to abandon my only loyal relative while he was suffering and dying on the pillory. Frollo's degeneration is dramatic and a real hint of how far we're going to come. This is the turning point of the novel. Loyalties are shifting, and they're only going to change more as we follow the rest of the story. I love this section.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Pat. And before we wrap up here, how do you feel about playing our little game?
Of course.
All right, Pat. Out of everyone and everything we discussed during today's episode, who would you like to A, meet at the inn, B, turn to dust with, and C, throw off of Notre Dame? Now, when I say meet at the inn, I don't mean cheat on your significant other and hide in a closet and shove a goat off into a corner and hope that the goat is occupying itself with, like, the iPad that you put in its hooves. I'm not talking about stabbing somebody. I'm not talking about anything that happened in the inn during this chapter. I'm talking about going on a date to a nicer inn run by a woman who has teeth.
I am definitely not meeting La Fallardelle at the inn. She is the innkeeper with the whiskers. She is nasty, and her establishment is nasty. She is a slumlord if I ever saw one. Phoebus just went to the cheapest place he could find on Google.
Absolutely, because he's broke. He's leeching off of his mother-in-law for funds, and I would argue that that's the only reason why he's staying with Fleur de Lis, for her money.
Oh, absolutely. She's got a little bit of land. She's got a pointy hat. She's got it all.
She's got it made.
I'll take Jehan to the inn. You know, I'm not going to meet him there romantically, but we'll hang out. He'll drink me under the table, but it'll be a good time.
Hopefully you will not be the one passed out in a snowbank at the end of the night.
I'll be the DD. As for who I'm turning to dust with, who could it be than Quasimodo? His suffering broke my heart, and I'm so happy he finally found a real girl to have a crush on, rather than his anime body pillows, his bells, his 2,000-pound brass bells. Sorry, Big Marie, but nice girls who give you drinks of water, even though you had wronged them in the past, are a lot more healthy to obsess over. This was the easiest throw off of Notre Dame of all time. I'm chucking Phoebus off there.
Yeah!
What a scumbag. He's cheap, he's inconsiderate, he's lazy. An all-around red flag. It's like May Day in the Soviet Union. There are so many red flags, right? In the words of the noble Cole Sprouse from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, how do you lose a woman? You forget to cherish her. Phoebus fails to cherish Fleur, he fails to cherish Esmeralda, and I'm sure he has failed to cherish all of the many hundreds of barmaids that he has been with in the past. Just a total user and abuser of women and his friends. He throws Jehan in a snowbank or a trash heap or whatever, and he only hangs out with him for his money. Why are you hanging out with a teenager anyhow?
How old is Phoebus?
I don't think they say. I assume he's in like his early 20s.
Yeah, he's probably around our age.
Right? You know who he is?
Who?
Phoebus is the guy you get to buy you beer when you're in high school. And you think he's really cool because he's an older guy.
Yeah.
But why are you going to a party with high schoolers? He's the lamest one there.
You know who he is? He is the guy in your dorm who you despise but you make friends with because he has a car on campus. That's who Phoebus is. You hang out with him because of what he represents. That's Phoebus. Why else would you hang out with him?
He's got spurs and a long sword. That impresses Esmeralda.
Well, Esmeralda's 16. She doesn't know anything. As for me, and we didn't mention this guy because, again, there is so much in these two books that you can talk about, and if we touched upon everything, these episodes would be 7 hours long. Now, I would love to talk about this novel for 7 hours at a time, but listener, that's not practical to you and that's not practical to us. But listener, if you would listen to us talk about these books for 7 hours at a time, one, all love to you, but I sincerely question your sanity. And two, let us know. Send us a DM on social media. Send us an email. We will deliver if there's interest in it, but I digress. We didn't mention him, but I am going to meet Michel Noiret, sworn trumpeter to the king, at the inn. He appears in this book for maybe a sentence or two. His job is to blow the trumpet and signal to the masses that Quasimodo's humiliation has begun, and then he disappears. And Pat, just spoil the book for me. Does he come back?
No, but for some reason he has a very elaborate introduction.
Yeah, he blows the horn, says Quasimodo's humiliation has begun, and then pieces out like Homer Simpson disappearing in that bush. I find musical talent very attractive, so yeah, I'll let this guy take me on a date to the inn. He's very talented, he has a good job, I'll let him wine and dine me at the inn. As for who I'm turning to dust with, we've got slim pickings in these chapters because everyone we meet is horrible in their own way. But I'm going to turn to dust with Paquette Le Chantefleurie, aka the Sack Woman. Now, I know that contradicts what I said in episode 1. In episode 1, I said that I would throw her off of Notre Dame because she was mean to Esmeralda for no reason. And yes, I do think that turning her trauma into general discrimination against an entire ethnicity is a red flag. I'm not a fan of that. However, I believe that women who make good mothers also make very good wives. I really commend her commitment to her daughter and her commitment to continuing to be a good mother, even though her daughter is no longer with her. So I'm turning to dust with Paquette Le Chantefleurie. Maybe we can do something about that little problem called racism. As for who I'm throwing off of Notre Dame, the crowd that was present at Quasimodo's humiliation. Every single one of them. We're painting the stones red today. My biggest problem with the crowd is not that the crowd delights in the suffering of another person, because I chalk that up to the time, right? This is before TV, this is before radio, this is before the internet, this is before mass literacy. They have nothing to do but watch people be hanged and flogged. So I don't blame them for their choice in entertainment. I do blame them for their inconsistency. Anyone who knows me personally knows that inconsistency is one of my pet peeves. And when you crown someone the Pope of Fools one night, applaud his public flogging and humiliation the very next morning, then a few minutes later applaud the fact that he is being granted mercy in the form of water by this beautiful young woman, that really bothers me. That lack of moral backbone and that lack of a solid, consistent opinion that you can land on is bothersome to me. So I'm throwing the crowd off of Notre Dame, and I have a feeling that they are not going to redeem themselves in my eyes throughout the rest of this novel. Pat, that brings us to the end of this episode, and we are over halfway done with covering the book.
Alrighty. And if you want more satirical discussions of the legal system, we'll see you next time.
See you next time, listener. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hunchcast. Ring that notification bell to be automatically updated when new episodes are released. For free bonus content and to share your thoughts with us, follow us on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok at the Hunchcast. The Hunchcast of Notre Dame is a production of 1482 Media. All rights reserved.